Hello, and welcome to Scary Stories. Tonight, we're sharing two terrifying stories where childhood fear wasn't imagination. It was a warning. A foster home with a dark secret. A shed that watched from the shadows. And a mother who didn't believe her son until he vanished without a trace. Turn down the lights and stay with us, because some stories only make sense when it's already too late. The shed at the bottom of the garden. This story will tell us about a childhood place that never truly let go, about a house meant to protect children, and a shed that watched them sleep. This story is about a night that was never meant to be remembered, and a place that refused to stay silent. It's the kind of memory that sleeps quietly for years, buried under time and distance, until one small encounter wakes it up again. So get comfortable. Imagine the crackle of a fire beside you and listen closely, because some childhood fears don't fade. They wait. I'm 20 years old now. I live in the south of the UK, in a town called Bournemouth. From the outside, it's a peaceful place, seaside air, quiet streets, nothing that hints at the kind of story I'm about to tell. But this story didn't begin last week. It began when I was 8 years old. Back then, my life was already unstable. For reasons that don't matter here, I was placed into foster care. I remember the car ride clearly, the silence, the feeling that something had been taken from me and replaced with uncertainty. The house I was brought to belonged to an older couple, somewhere in their 50s or 60s. They were polite, calm, almost too calm. They had an adult son in his 30s who lived in the basement. He rarely spoke. When he did, his eyes never quite met yours. What struck me most, even at that age, were the walls, the hallway, the living room, even the staircase. Everywhere you looked, there were framed photographs of children. Dozens of them. Smiling faces, school pictures, birthday snapshots. At the time, I was told they were photos of children the couple had cared for over the years. More than 20, maybe more. I remember feeling strangely uneasy, not because of the photos themselves, but because none of the children ever appeared twice. One picture, one moment, then gone. Only years later would that detail return to haunt me. The house itself had a strange weight to it. I couldn't explain it then, but now I know the building dated back to the late 1920s. After doing some research years later, I learned it had once been a children's care home. From the very first night, I felt uncomfortable, not homesick, not scared of strangers. It was a deeper feeling, the sensation of being watched when no one was there. My bedroom was at the back of the house, overlooking the garden. The garden was long and overgrown, and at the very bottom stood a shed, old, wooden, darkened by age and rot. The first night, I found myself standing at the window, staring at it. I couldn't look away. Something about that shed pulled at me, like it was aware of my presence, like it had been waiting. Over the next few nights, the dreams started. Every dream was the same. I'd wake up in my bed, freezing cold, unable to move. And there, in the distance, I'd see an older man, pale, thin, watching me through the glass of the shed window. Sometimes he smiled, sometimes he didn't. Every time I woke up shaking, drenched in sweat, heart pounding. One night, after another nightmare, I pushed aside the curtains, and I swear to this day, I saw a face, not a reflection, not a trick of the light. a face staring back at me from the shed window. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just stood there, frozen behind the curtains until the sky slowly turned grey with morning light. The next day, I told the foster couple. At first, they laughed it off, said I was adjusting, said nightmares were normal. But the moment I mentioned the shed, their expressions changed. Their voices hardened. They told me sharply that it was just a dream, and they told me never to go near the shed. That reaction scared me more than the nightmare ever had. There was another foster child in the house, a 16-year-old girl who had been there for over a year. One afternoon, when the adults weren't around, I told her about the dreams. She went quiet. Then she said something I'll never forget. "Don't get up at night," she whispered. "Don't look out the window." That was all. She didn't explain. She didn't elaborate. It was as if she understood completely and didn't want to say more. Then came the night. Everything changed. I went to bed like usual. The same cold feeling crept into my bones. The same dream began. But this time, it didn't stop at the window. I dreamed that I got out of bed. I remember knowing I was dreaming. I remember trying to wake myself up, but I couldn't. I walked down the stairs, out the back door, across the overgrown grass, toward the shed. The air felt heavy, wrong. I reached the door, and then everything went black. I woke up to shouting. The man of the house stood over me, furious. I was lying outside, in front of the shed, soaked with dew and dirt. He demanded to know why I was there. Then he leaned down and hissed something that still chills me. "Stay away from the shed." He told me not to tell my social worker, not to tell anyone. A few days later, I was moved to another placement. It was meant to be short-term anyway. Over time, the nightmares faded. Life moved on. I grew up. I tried to forget. Until last week. I was walking through town when someone called my name. It was her, the girl from the house. I don't know how she recognized me after all these years, but she did. We talked, and slowly, carefully, I mentioned the house. Her face changed. She told me she'd experienced the same things, the dreams, the shed, the man. And she wasn't the only one. Other children, short-term placements, all of them left soon after asking questions. That night, the dreams returned. The shed, the man, watching. Now I'm left with questions. I've researched the house, the couple, and sometimes I think about going back. They say childhood memories fade with time. That fear shrinks as we grow older. But some places don't exist in the past. They linger. They wait. If a house has seen too many children come and go, if a shed has watched too many windows, maybe it doesn't forget, and maybe it's still watching. So if you ever feel eyes on you in the dark, don't look out the window and never follow a dream outside. They said you'd understand. Too late. This story will tell us about a warning that came from a child and the terrible price of not listening. Parents are taught to protect their children from monsters. But what if the real danger is teaching them that monsters don't exist? Tonight's story is not about imagination or childhood fear. It's about a mother who learned the truth too late, and about the things that stand quietly in the corners of our rooms, waiting for someone to stop believing. So settle in, listen carefully, and remember this one thing as the fire crackles beside us. Children don't always make things up. The police stopped listening months ago. The therapists only wanted to talk about grief. So if something happens to me after I tell you this, at least someone will finally know the truth. My son Evan was 7 years old when he started seeing things. He never called them ghosts. He said they were people who didn't know they were gone. The first time he mentioned them, I was tucking him into bed. He stared past my shoulder, eyes locked on the far corner of his room, and asked if I could tell the wet lady to stop dripping on his toys. I laughed nervously and checked the room. The carpet was dry. The walls were bare. Nothing was there. I told him it was just a bad dream. Evan didn't argue. He just whispered, "She said you'd say that." I remember frowning and asking, "Who said that?" "The lady," he replied. "She's all wet. Can we give her a towel?" I snapped at him, told him to stop the nonsense, told him there was nothing there. Even now, writing this, I feel sick thinking about how dismissive I was. I should have listened. I should have let him sleep in our bed. After that night, the sightings spread. Evan said a tall man stood in the hallway every night. Too tall, too thin. His neck bent at an angle no human neck should bend. He said some of them weren't really people at all, just shapes darker than the darkness behind them. At school, Evan began crying whenever the clock ticked too loudly. His teacher called me in one afternoon, clearly uncomfortable. Evan had told her there were children sitting at the back of the classroom, children who never went home, burned children, broken children, quiet children who watched the clock. They watch it when they're about to take someone, he'd said. No one believed him. Not the teachers, not the doctors, not even his own parents. The school counselor said anxiety. The pediatrician said night terrors. And I agreed, because believing my son meant accepting that something was terribly, horribly wrong. Every night, Evan woke up screaming at exactly 3:17 a.m. Never earlier, never later. Always 3:17. He begged me not to turn off the lights, begged me not to close his bedroom door. He said the dark made them braver, that they stood closer every night, whispering numbers under their breath. "They're counting me," he cried. "They're almost done." I told him monsters weren't real. I asked what they could possibly be counting. I blamed school stress, bad dreams. That's when he started sleepwalking. One night, I found him standing in the hallway, forehead pressed flat against the wall, whispering numbers in a voice that didn't sound like his own. When I grabbed him, his skin was ice cold. "They don't want me telling you," he sobbed. "They said, if you don't believe me, I have to stay with them." I remember thinking something was deeply wrong, but not supernatural wrong. We lived in a safe neighborhood. Evan had friends. He loved school. He played sports. Nothing traumatic had ever happened to him. So we scheduled a child psychologist. 2 nights before the appointment, Evan disappeared. His bed was empty. His bedroom window was wide open, despite the freezing air. Muddy footprints crossed the carpet, small, bare feet. But the toes were too long, pressed too deep, like something heavy had been dragged alongside him. The police searched for weeks. Dogs eventually lost the scent in our backyard. They told us children sometimes run away. They said trauma makes parents imagine patterns. Eventually, they stopped calling, stopped sounding concerned. When I broke down on the phone, screaming for answers, they accused me of harassment. I felt completely alone. Packing away Evan's room nearly broke me. The silence was unbearable. That's when I found his notebook. Every page was filled with drawings, figures crowded into bedrooms, stairwells, classrooms. Some were burned black, some twisted, their limbs bent in impossible ways. All of them were staring directly out of the page. Under each drawing was a name, a date, a place. Every single one matched a real death. A boarding house fire where our home now stands. A boiler room accident beneath Evan's school. A hospital that once occupied the land before it was torn down. Every death happened at 3:17 a.m. The last page showed Evan standing among them, their hands wrapped around his arms. Beneath it, written so faintly the paper nearly tore, were the words, "They said you'd understand too late." I collapsed to the floor, screaming apologies into the empty room, begging, pleading, promising I believed him now. He never came back. I spent months researching disappearances, patterns, anything. That's when I found stories about shadow people, tall, featureless figures seen by children shortly before they vanished. No struggle, no sound. One moment there, the next gone. In 2024 alone, over 530,000 people were reported missing in America. Hundreds of thousands were never found. Where did they go? Last night, I woke up at 3:17. The room smelled like smoke and damp earth. And for the first time, I saw them. They stood in the corners, watching the clock, counting. I begged them to take me instead, to bring my son back. One of them whispered, "It's too late." The light snapped on. My husband had woken up. They vanished instantly. He rubbed my back and said, "Honey, it's just a bad dream. Monsters aren't real." I looked at him and whispered, "They said you'd say that." Some stories sound unbelievable, too dark, too impossible. But the woman who told this story vanished shortly after. Her hospital had no record of her transfer. Her husband's new firm never existed, and every tragedy she mentioned checked out. So if your child ever tells you they see something, hear something, or feel something you can't explain, listen. Because disbelief doesn't make monsters disappear. It just makes them patient. And somewhere, right now, they're watching the clock and counting. You've been watching Scary Stories. Tonight's stories remind us that some warnings come quietly, and some are ignored forever. If you want more disturbing and unexplained stories, subscribe to Scary Stories and keep watching. And remember, if someone tells you they see something in the dark, listen.